Your friend in Central Illinois, WHOW.
Top of the morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. The WHOW Morning Show streams to Facebook and YouTube. It's brought to you by Peterson Insurance, your Beacon Insurance agent in Clinton. Mrs. Cheryl Warner is the superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools. My guest on the phone today, Mrs. Warner, a good morning and happy holidays to you. How are you today?
Good morning. Happy holidays to you, too. We are in our last Friday before break with 2 more days. The countdown has officially begun, and kids are very excited.
Very good, yeah. So, yeah, everybody's winding down the semester. Now, is it like towards the end of the school year where, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and maybe the kids are a little more squirrely and antsy, particularly because, young kids and Christmas, I mean, this is just a different time of year for them. So, like, is there a different kind of excitement in the air, I guess, right now?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's different between our elementary students and our older students as well, because they view the holiday differently, right?
Uh-huh.
Our older students are very anxious for a break. Our younger students are very, very excited for Christmas to come. So I would say the teachers are masters at trying to keep students engaged and motivated during this time by sprinkling in some holiday cheer during their instruction to keep everybody hanging in there till the last day. So
yes. Yep, no question. Well, Mrs. Warner, I'll tell you what, as we chat here this morning, I know you and I in our last conversation, you were talking with me a lot about collaboration for basically emergency situation strategies, and this kind of encompassed a lot of schools in Central Illinois and particularly districts close to you as you kind of collaborate in the event of a horrible situation you may have to deal with, and just making sure everyone's on the same page. And it sounds like that has kind of come to a conclusion. Is that fair to say?
Well, I would say it's probably going to always be ongoing, right? Because emergency planning is kind of one of those processes and documents that is living and breathing at all times, and you're always going back to it, and you're always revisiting it, and you're always learning from things that happen. But I would say that we're making tremendous leaps of progress in terms of the planning that's going on to get us to the point where we're just maintaining. Yes, we talked about the county crisis team, where we have a collection of 11 districts working with each other to create some common plans for reunification and assist each other if we were ever in an emergency crisis. And that's just kind of one portion of what we consider a very large emergency operation plan. And what has been good for Warrensburg is just at this week's board meeting, we approved our new and updated emergency operation plan, which is based on FEMA recommendations. So ultimately, that's about a 100-page document that kind of guides us in every scenario and situation that could potentially happen in terms of crisis or emergencies in the school setting, all the way from active shooters to weather-related emergencies or natural disasters, train derailment, those kinds of things. So very broad, right? And then that plan is kind of broken down into lots of smaller components that give us the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day. So we've made tremendous progress in that, which we feel good about the direction that we are headed. One of the key things for us, and it's an unfortunate reality, right, in society and schools, is that we all have to be prepared for the inevitable of if there actually were to be an active shooter situation. And unfortunately, we've seen in the media and the news schools dealing with more threats than they have ever in the past, whether they're false or true. It's happening. So I'm a certified Alice active shooter trainer. So at this point, all of the staff at Warrensburg have been trained. And then when we come back from Christmas break, we will start planning drills that would actually involve students and law enforcement, which we're required to do in the state of Illinois. So that training will kind of continue along the spectrum to make sure that everybody knows what do we do in that kind of situation. Because we know when something like that happens, typically it takes 5 to 6 minutes or sometimes longer for law enforcement to show up. So the goal is to delay that incident and decrease the amount of injuries as much as possible. And that's left up to the staff to do. because that's our reality.
Sure, sure. Well, and so, keeping your staff informed of all these changes, which, it sounds like there's a lot of them. So how do you, kind of keep them updated and, without maybe throwing a big booklet of new information in front of them all at once? Is that a process on its own?
It is a process. And, I mentioned like the 100-page emergency operation plan. That is not something we hand over to teachers and say, here you go.
Right.
That's not an effective strategy by any means. They need the down and dirty version of what do I do in my classroom with my students when there is a crisis. And 100 pages is not something you reference when you have a crisis going on, right? It's the structure behind the scenes. So one of the things that we will be doing as soon as we return from holiday break is we are actually pushing out to all of the staff a new app. We actually subscribe to a service called Navigate 360 to help us with our emergency planning. It helps us organize all of it in one place, and this app will be able to be pushed out to all of our staff, which means they will have easy access to what we call quick reference crisis flip charts on their phone. They will have access to phone lists. They will have access to medical information about their particular students that is confidential only for them. They will also have the ability to basically make an alert if a crisis happens in their classroom, and they'll have the ability to call 911 through this app. Lots of other features are involved too, but we will start training on those scenarios as soon as we return from Christmas break, and just trying to supply them with the tools needed. And that includes updated crisis kits in their classrooms, like supplies that they would need to take with them if an emergency were to occur.
Again, our guest on the phone today is Mrs. Cheryl Warner. She is the superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham schools. And I know the tragedies we see across the country, Mrs. Warner, and while devastating, in the aftermath, work just begins as much as soon as possible to learn about, what went wrong, how can that be fixed, and then that kind of gets taken to a national conversation. Not a national conversation in terms of, at a countrywide level we have it, but locally across the country, people take up the conversation of trying to figure out what was learned in those various circumstances. Given recent events of the last year in 2022, we've seen some really terrible things happen. I don't know if you're able to divulge what has been learned from some of those things, but if you are, do you mind sharing that?
Right. And you're right. It's unfortunate. We learn from tragedy, and we're able to fine tune our plans. And we do rely on some national organizations to assist us. So, I mentioned ALICE active shooter training, and that's a program that's actually promoted by the U.S. Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Department of Justice, FBI, and also FEMA, because they do in-depth research on all of these tragedies. And some little things that we have learned that are, some kind of technical, easy things that can be shared is some of the techniques that these active shooters actually engage in. So for example, when I go and I train schools, we talk about some of the statistics. One of them being 75% of the time, that individual publicizes their plans before they act on it. Typically through social media, right? So, those are little things to watch for that we have learned about. Unfortunately, there's enough data that there's research out there that helps us basically look at how do we try to prevent these things. So when somebody puts that information out there, we have to look at it as though it's true and accurate and a possible threat. And that's kind of an education piece across society, right? Not just for students and staff, that when we see these alarming things on social media or a written form somewhere, that we need to let others know that can actually try to stop a situation from happening or investigate it more. So that's just kind of one example of things that we have learned.
Yeah. Well, and that goes to the point of, see something, say something, particularly on social media. Take notice of, some, not so great messages you might, or not, not take advantage, but like, say something about, messages online that, may be concerning in those sorts of things.
Right, exactly. And that's the whole concept, to see something, say something. The thing that's difficult with that about students is they see that as snitching, right? So we have to kind of try to change the perspective of that no, this is what we do to keep everybody safe, including you, you know, and this is for not only threat to others, but suicide and self-harm. You know, if you have a friend that's reaching out, yes, you probably would go to somebody because you want that to stop and you want your friend to be safe. So it's across the board. Absolutely, that's the concept, societal across the board. If we see those things, typically they're a cry for help, and we need to support that person.
Sure.
We know that most of these violent incidents have some kind of connection to a mental health concern, right? So it's a bigger problem than just violence. But
Yep. Anything else on this, Mrs. Warner, that came out of it you want to point out or talk about?
Not really. We will just kind of keep going through this process, and it's going to continue to evolve. We are at the point right now with a strong partnership with Maroa Forsyth School District, and we are making a lot of progress on a joint reunification plan that if we were to ever have an emergency, we have already basically secured memorandums of understanding with a couple of churches that are local and in close location to us that we would utilize. And that's what's refreshing about this process too. You know, everybody in the community wants to help when there's an emergency of this type. And so it's nice to be able to sit at a table with multiple agencies and school districts and plan together how we can support each other if we ever needed to.
Yeah.
Because these are things where we do have to work with each other. Let's learn from each other. None of us really have the capacity to handle those kinds of emergencies alone, and we shouldn't have to, you know. And I can say the same. You know, we had a recent tragedy in our community not too long ago, and very quickly, our district received support from our county crisis flight team, the SISM team, and also Paw Print Ministries immediately came in, provided support for our staff, for our students, our families. We have a really good network of support in Macon County. I can't say better things about them. And I think it's gotten stronger as we've developed that. It's become a priority for us, and it's become kind of a smooth rolling machine where when we need assistance with something, it's a very quick phone call. Then we've got multiple agencies on a Zoom call together planning that process. And by the time it comes into the schools, it's done with confidentiality and sensitivity and accurateness. So
yeah. Well, and just real quick, wrap us up with this, Mrs. Warner. You talked about training for teachers. What does that look like, and how long does that process play itself out?
So for us in particular, we divided our training for teachers between elementary and secondary, because even though we are a combined campus with our buildings all connected, we have some very distinct differences in how our buildings are laid out and door structure and whatnot between the buildings. So we did divide that training up, because one of the key pieces is staff and teachers knowing their environment very well and what they would need to do to protect themselves in that environment. So it's key to train them on, how does your door open, exterior, interior? You know, how are you barricading a door if you ever need to? What are the safety things that you have in your classroom that can actually assist you? If you ever needed to distract, you know, a violent intruder or try to escape, what are the routes to do that? What are the methods that you have to distract? What are the methods that you have to counter? So we spend basically about 2 hours talking about the strategies and the philosophy behind that training. And then we do the physical training, and we actually go through multiple scenarios of what could potentially occur in an active shooter situation, and we act those out. And that's when I bring in assistance from other ALICE active shooter trainers as well, which is law enforcement and other superintendents and agencies across the county. And we do this together as a team, and we break the teachers up into small groups, and we do it in their environment, so they're problem solving exactly in their classroom and their space.
Well, I know we've got plenty more to dive into, Mrs. Warner. We'll take a break here. How do folks, again, follow along with all things Warrensburg-Latham schools?
one of the best things to do is check out our website and then also subscribe to the Warrensburg-Latham app in the App Store.
Very good. Again, that is Mrs. Cheryl Warner, Superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools, our guest on the phone this morning. More to come with her on the WHOW Morning Show.
WHOW.
Connected.
Let's check the markets now on the RFD Radio Network. I'm Jim Taylor. Corn slightly lower, beans slightly higher. Chicago wheat slightly lower. March corn 652.5 down a penny. May corn down 3/4, 653. July corn 648 1/4 down 3/4. January beans 1474 3/4 up 1 1/4. March beans up 1 1/4, 1478. May beans 1481 1/4. Up 1 1/2. March Chicago wheat 755 3/4 down 1 1/2. May wheat 764 1/4 down 1 3/4. January bean meal 465 even up 970. January bean oil down 97 cents 62.85. Livestock market January feeders 184.05 up $1. December live cattle up $0.50 154.55. February lean hogs 82.75 up $1.10. Energy market January crude oil 74.26 down $1.85. Jim Taylor on the RFD Radio Network.
Your own home without the maintenance. If you're 55 or better, a beautiful Liberty Village villa could be yours. This is Erin, and I invite you to come take a tour of our move-in ready villa. Click the Liberty Village icon at DeWittDailyNews.com.
Simply the finest.
DeWittDailyNews.com is the area's leading local news source 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Get the latest local news, obituaries, police blotter, weather forecast, and more with no paywall. Head to DeWittDailyNews.com to get the local information you need to know.
The Miller Media Group is making it easy for you to show your support for the many people impacted in Florida by Hurricane Ian. Click the Florida Disaster Fund link on the blue menu bar of TaylorvilleDailyNews.com or DeWittDailyNews.com and make your contribution to the Florida Disaster Fund. Many have lost their homes, their personal belongings, and in many cases, their loved ones. It's going to take time to rebuild. Please do whatever you can to support this effort by clicking the Florida Disaster Fund link on the blue menu bar of DeWittDailyNews.com or TaylorvilleDailyNews.com.
Your friend in Central Illinois. WHOW.
Once again, a good morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. The WHOW Morning Show streams to Facebook and YouTube, brought to you by Peterson Insurance, your Pekin Insurance agent in Clinton. Again, Mrs. Cheryl Warner, Superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools, on the phone with us here for this morning. And Mrs. Warner, let's talk Christmas season. You were telling me before we got started, your students have really stepped up to make this a very nice holiday season in your district. What are they doing? What's going on?
Absolutely. The students and staff are, like I said, they're excited for break, but they're also focusing on others, right? Which is so critical. So they're excited about the holiday. They're excited to have a little break from school. But the teachers are doing a fantastic job of keeping them engaged and spreading the message of how important it is to focus on others, not just at the holiday time, but at all times. So there are multiple things going on in each of the buildings. They have toy drives going on. They have donations of gift cards, multiple forms of support in place for families that are in need. And they're also joining efforts with the community agencies for these supports, such as the Lions Club, the account that we have right now at the Buena Vista Bank for one of our families. But then the teachers are also aware of how we need to keep students engaged in education at this time when it's hard and they're distracted by the holiday, right? So it's nice to walk through the buildings and see how creative they're getting. There's lots of holiday motivation going on. This morning there was a Christmas movie trivia contest. This afternoon, I get to be a judge in a door decorating contest. And then what has been phenomenal, and you've probably seen this already, our Warrensburg-Latham Elementary School has been completely transformed into a Charlie Brown Christmas, which is amazing. You walk through that building and it is like being part of the Peanuts cartoon. And to watch the kids come in on Monday morning and see the transformation of their building was probably one of the biggest pleasures of this entire year. They were in total awe. So it's just a really nice, calming influence on everyone as they walk through the halls, and twinkle lights are going on, and it's keeping kids engaged, focused on caring for others, and honestly, we couldn't ask for better.
Mrs. Warner, as it relates to a couple of basketball games tonight, I know your students are doing something special, and if I'm not mistaken, I thought this had become an annual event. I could be very wrong, but what's going on tonight? What's special about this evening's basketball games?
So we've got the Teaming Up to Fight Cancer, the cancer awareness basketball games, and what's really nice is, and our CIC conference has been agreeable to kind of shifting our games. So we're able to have a varsity girls and varsity boys basketball games tonight. The girls are playing at 6 o'clock versus Monticello. The boys are playing at 7:30 versus Moreau Forsyth. And tonight, all proceeds are going to Cancer Care Specialist Charitable Fund, which means all donations will be locally distributed. So we have a silent raffle going on, a remembrance wall, a 50-50 raffle, and then we also will have multiple speakers and recognition of those that have been affected and impacted by cancer that live in our community. So it's going to be a big night for us, and again, it's another way for us to give back.
Very good, very good. Well, Mrs. Warner, I look at the clock. We are quickly running out of time. I've got about a minute and a half left with you. Anything else you want to mention this morning before we let you go?
I just want to wish everybody out there a great holiday. It's crazy how quickly this year has gone by. But I do want to say it's so nice to have a year that's been different than the last couple as schools were navigating the pandemic. Is it completely gone? No, unfortunately, I got a text message from my mom yesterday that both my mom and dad are COVID positive. So it's still hanging on in there, but it's not the priority and the focus of our lives, right? We are back to normal school. We are back to focusing on what it needs to be, and it's so refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. Yeah.
Sure. Well, Mrs. Warner, you mentioned the end of the school, or the end of the school year, the end of the semester is next week. What does the Christmas break schedule look like?
Right. So for us, our last day of school is Tuesday the 20th, and our teachers will return on Wednesday, January 4th for a full Teacher Institute Day, and then our students will come back on the 5th, which we will be anxiously awaiting their arrival.
Mrs. Warner, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to you. Thank you for making time for us. Cheryl Warner is the superintendent of Warrensburg-Latham Schools. My guest on the phone. The morning show streams to Facebook and YouTube. It's brought to you by Peterson Insurance, your Pekin Insurance agent in Clinton.
WHOW.